and welcome, my friend, Dr. Anand Patel. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me onto your podcast. It's a delight to be here.
I'm so happy that you're here because you're the one person I know that we can have a great conversation around sex with. That sounds a bit weird, doesn't it?
Yes, indeed.
um,
Although I think
just
perhaps gay men in general are quite good at having a conversation about sex with their friends, perhaps not necessarily telling the truth always, but yes, they're generally pretty open about things in most cases.
Yeah, and that's why I think this would be, looking at the subjects that we're going to cover, and I've got my community to send me questions. I think everyone who's listening to this is really going to benefit from exploring the myths. We're going to be talking about just sex drive. We're going to be talking about libido, around menopause, antidepressants, all sorts of things. So, and porn, yeah, of course, got to slide that one in.
Yeah, we're literally going to try and wedge it all into about half an hour, so no, let's go.
Yeah, let's just do it. Let's just do it. Okay, right. So, um, is there a problem around reduced sex drive at the moment? I seem to be hearing about it quite a lot. All sorts of things going on. Is there something happening which is causing an issue?
I mean, I work mainly in men's health. I mean, I work as a GP and so
Yeah.
see women as well, but mostly I see men, and men present between the ages of say 20 and 80 or 90 really, to me with sexual function problems. And we've certainly seen a massive increase at our clinic in terms of interest. In people wanting to know a bit more about the clinic, a bit more about sexual problems, sexual function, and desire in particular, actually. It's not just I can't get an erection, which used to be 10 years ago what was coming through the door. It's much more so now. I just don't seem to have sexual interest, which is kind of what libido is for me. You know, if you would previously have looked at someone and thought, oh, they're attractive as they walk past you, or had a stirring in your groin or something like that, and now nothing. You know, they could just literally walk past you, and that's the sort of thing we're hearing. Going, 5, 10 years ago, I'd have felt really sexually interested. I'd looked at that person, not trying to stare or anything, but actually that would have caused sexual interest in my brain, which would have then transmitted to my groin. Now there's none of that. And I do wonder whether partly there's some sort of social stuff going on out there. There's some biological, chemical stuff with our environment that's happening in terms of exposure to higher levels of estrogens, things that are actually altering our sort of male hormonal chemistry. And this will equally apply to people. If you've got ovaries and you're working on that system, it's a very similar system. And I think those external environmental factors may well be affecting us. Certainly, they're affecting our sperm count, etc. And I think there are messages we're getting externally about how we should be having sex and what the sort of sex we should be having and who we should be having sex with, and what sex should mean, that are kind of changing what we're kind of brought up to believe. We're in a very transient moment, I feel. I think in the last, even short periods, say, I know for most people 50 years will feel like a long time, but actually if we're changing the sort of culture about how we talk about sex or how society is structured around sex, because most societies at the moment are monogamous mostly. There are about sort of quarter to a third of societies around the world that aren't monogamous. So that's interesting as well. But actually, if you're trying to have a structured monogamous society, it's kind of better that they don't want to have sex and that they are structured within sort of narrow social bandwidths about what's appropriate and what's sensible. So that's a long way of saying yes. I think there are more people
Okay.
turning up to see me and other professionals about low libido, low sexual desire. But I think there's loads of different reasons, from biological, chemical, environmental to social.
Okay. Brilliant. And just going into, I've had lots of young guys come to me, and one of the things that we've looked at in regards to what's happening with their libido is porn and their relationship with, they've become more addicted to, say, a person on screen, and they've kind of lost desire for people in real life or their partner. What have you seen in regards to this area, and how is porn affecting our expectations of sex and also how we process sex?
I think it's a really interesting question, and it's very timely. I mean, pornography's been around, what, for 20, 30 years in sort of visual context online. I mean, the last sort of 10 or 15 years, most people have high-speed internet, are able to get access to pretty much whatever they want, depending on the country's filters, right?
Yeah.
So they can see virtually everything. The average age of exposure is somewhere between 10 and 12. So, people are seeing pornography from a very young age,
Mm.
either being shown by their friends. I mean, I remember when I was younger, my cousin showed me a copy of Razzle when I was 12 and my brother was 10, and this was, oh my God, it's a porn magazine. But
Mm.
that's literally all I would see, apart from the Littlewoods catalogue, which is like a catalogue full of people with underwear and stuff. And so it was all stuff that was really low key in
Yeah.
general that you had to then fantasize about. So a lot of it was mental and cerebral, rather than actually you having so much visual input all the time. Now,
Mm.
there's lots of arguments out there in the community, and I'm sure as a therapist, that is porn a bad thing? Is it a good thing? Well, it's here now. There's not anything we can do about it. It's in our psyche. It's in the environment.
Mm.
We have to learn how to deal with it. But actually, there's not a huge amount of evidence that it's actually bad for you.
Okay.
So that's actually really important to say. There was a lot of early evidence, as in studies done, saying, I mean, there was a fascinating one done in America where they got two groups of sort of teenagers. And one who'd been exposed to pornography, maybe about the age of 15 or 16, the other group that hadn't. And the group that had been exposed to pornography rated their partners as less attractive. They rated the sex that they were having as less good, and they rated their relationships as less good quality. And I found that
Okay.
really, really
Mm.
interesting because, is it a comparison effect that obviously their partners, who are probably also 15 and 16, can't match up to, the people that they're watching online? Because, like, if you're watching porn, it's basically, I mean, like, you wouldn't watch James Bond to learn how to drive. Yet here we're watching pornography as our sex ed. Because I think mostly around the world, and there are countries where this isn't true, sex ed isn't actually brilliant. And in some places it's very restrictive. In the UK, it's actually quite poor as well. Until recently, I think we had the highest pregnancy rate in Europe. So we are learning more and more about the impact of sex education, and I think lots of people have turned to pornography, and some people are having much better sex lives. As a result of pornography, they've seen a sexual position that they think, oh, that's interesting, or they've seen a type of sex which they never thought they'd be into, and actually go, oh no, that is something that I'm drawn to. Some people have learned that they like S&M, sadomasochism, which hadn't been something that they'd necessarily understood about themselves. So I think there is lots of learning that goes on, which is all positive. But I think there are some people that can, I think, code their bodies in a way. I mean, if we think of our hand, our penis, if we talk about using porn, I think we have to face the fact that it's generally masturbating. We're not just sat there with popcorn and watching, our favorite porn star getting railed. What we're doing is actively engaging
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
masturbation, usually, or sex, or whatever it is that you're doing. So if you're engaging with that, there's a certain way that you often do that. You learn a pattern of behaviour.
Mm.
So you might open up your laptop. You may not use lubricant. So you may have a dry hand. And for example, the dry hand, the sort of pressure and the tension and the friction you get with a dry hand compared to masturbating with a lubricated hand, or actually penetrative sex, oral, anal, or vaginal sex, whatever type of sex you're trying to have, they don't mirror each other. And if you have spent, for example, from the age of 12 to 17, for example, masturbating on almost a daily basis, sometimes several times a day if you're very excited and very charged sexually, then you're going to learn to code, I think. That the way that you reach orgasm is you have a dry hand and you masturbate with a certain stroke speed, and you speed up towards the end, and it may be that for you focus on the head, or you only focus on the shaft, and therefore you neglect part of the penis or vulva or clitoris, or whatever, however you're masturbating, which means it doesn't necessarily replicate what you do in sex with another person. And therefore, I feel strongly that there are some people that get the sensation of death grip. They're squeezing their penis so hard in their really tight, glove, that actually that doesn't replicate what a vagina or an anus or a mouth does. And therefore, they're actually struggling to ejaculate in those orifices. And what they're having
Okay.
to do is pull out, masturbate to
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
to orgasm. And you see that as a kind of trope on porn, don't you? People pull out, and it's very visual because the idea is
Yeah.
you're meant to be able to see everything, because if you don't see it, did it really happen? And that's the point of porn, is to make it ultra visual,
Mm.
ultra stimulating, ultra arousing, which sex is in a different way with another person, because actually you get all that tactile stimulus that you don't otherwise get. I mean, I think it's so important to recognize that the physical contact actually makes a really big difference to certain hormonal releases in the body and brain. For example, like oxytocin is much higher in physical contact than it is if you're looking at a screen. So there are some differences and benefits from both ways, but I don't think anything can match the sheer visceral and innovating factor of having multiple screens open of videos that are 2 to 3 minutes long, and then you're skipping between sexual partners almost, which keeps you frantically engaged. And with the best will in the world, you may love your partner as much as you can, but actually, how sexually stimulating can one person be when you've got the potential to have sex in half an hour with 57 people?
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Doing huge numbers of things in lots of different positions that you may or may not ever engage in lots of different ways. And I think that is hyper stimulating. And I don't know if it works for some people during sex, but equally to say that for other people, it's actually a very educational moment, and some of it is positive. I wouldn't necessarily say it's always positive for the performers. And I think there are some companies that are trying to do more ethical pornography that has more support for their performers around there. So just putting that out there.
Yeah, no, I think these are really great points, and it's something I do hear quite a lot. Is I don't find my partner as interesting as the people I'm seeing on screen, and also they're being exposed to. I guess that hyperstimulation means it's going to plateau at some point, so they're going to look for something even more stimulating. And then at a plateau, then there'll be something even more stimulating. So is this where extreme fetish can come from?
Well, I think so fetish is kind of like an attraction to an object, and I don't know if it kind of makes you go that way. I think if you have an interest in inanimate objects, then maybe you'll have a fetish going on, and that will then just allow you to understand it, perhaps. But in some people, they do become very narrowly focused, for example, on one particular porn star or one particular sex act, and that's then not what's demanded. Also, the type of sex can often be quite aggressive. Sometimes it can be very forceful, and that can lead to expectations and problematic expectations of first sexual contact. You're expecting that actually part of sex is to be choked, and certainly in certain sexual groups, choking has become a feature of sex. Certainly, some people have significant they add significant erotic value to the volume of ejaculate. You're thinking, who on earth decided that you have to come like buckets? Like, where did that come from? But it's all because it's visual,
Yeah.
and we've somehow decided to not only put a value on the size of a penis or the appearance of a vulva, but it's also the amount of ejaculate that comes out. And if a woman can squirt, and if a rectum can take 10 inches, and all of these, and if people can last hours, and you're thinking, I don't think that's hugely helpful. I don't think that's really helpful in terms of us recognizing that this is not reality. And even if we do recognize that this isn't reality, it does set up expectations in our minds that I don't think necessarily helpful.
Yeah, that narrative that can build up from watching porn. Is this something that do you think that's having an impact on the confidence around sex? Is I can't match what I'm seeing on screen. I can't even find a partner who looks like these people on screen. So therefore, I'm a failure. I don't look like, my penis isn't going to be that big like I can see, the whoppers that are on screen. It just must have an impact on their mental health as well, surely.
Yeah, I mean, and certainly I've had patients. I mean, obviously you will see much more about their mental health than I perhaps will, but certainly the patients I'm seeing, there's a whole overlap between the issue they're concerned about and then the behaviors they develop to try and manage their concerns. So if, for example, they have premature ejaculation, which that's a real problem that actually we're having at the moment. We've got loads of men coming to see me with what they say is premature ejaculation. You kind of break it down going, so what does early ejaculation mean for you? And they go, I ejaculate after 20 minutes. And I'm like, well, what did you think was normal? And they were like, half an hour, an hour. And I was kind of going, well, in the UK, the average time, there's a study that was done a few years ago, was 5.4 minutes from penetration to ejaculation, and the more recent study was 7.2 minutes. So it's really, I mean, for some people that will feel like a long time. For other people, you're like, oh God, okay, actually recognizing the normality of the situation, one, makes them feel more confident and comfortable with it, But two, where has their expectation come from? And that's almost certainly pornography related, and certainly the information they're getting from social media, from their friends and their peer groups. We're not going to really be talking to our parents about sex to the detail of, oh, actually, Dad, I'm worried I come too early. That's not the conversation I feel I could ever have with my dad. I mean, I couldn't have any conversation about sex with my dad.
Yeah.
So that would make, who else am I going to go for information? And I think that these misinformation plus expectations that are unhelpful then lead to anxiety about performance. They can lead to even relationship avoidance. I mean, I've had patients who have specifically not got together and had relationships, and they've been asked out but avoided them because at a party when they were 14, someone reached down their pants and they ejaculated, or almost instantly. And that has made them so worried about being known as a preemie, or whatever horrible term that people use to define. If you get a nickname like that, it kind of sticks, doesn't it? And it can stick for years and be really problematic. So yeah, I mean, we're getting issues with premature ejaculation and the relationship concerns, but often we realize that premature ejaculators can be really good lovers, because often they focus on the foreplay and the pleasure of the other person before they kind of hop on and finish. So premature ejaculation is actually gone in 60 seconds. So it's from penetration to ejaculation, or whatever sex act, within 60 seconds. Of penetration. So it's kind of a relatively short time, and most people are longer than that. But equally, it's kept in the population because evolutionary wise, the sooner you can get your genes away, the less likely you are to have your hamstrings ripped out or your buttocks bitten into by the saber-toothed tiger that's tracking you whilst you're trying to get your end away.
That's powerful imagery. Actually, talking about the evolutionary side of things, what is the and I know that you've talked about this before. I did see you talk about this on another clip. But what is the evolutionary reason for the shape of the penis?
There's lots of different theories about it, but it's one potential theory which I find really interesting is that the bell ends, so the tip of it is shaped so that it would scrape out the maximum amount of semen that the previous partner had deposited, with the idea that our precursor ape species were non-monogamous in the main, and actually there would be multiple males mating with the female, and actually it would be the highest quality sperm that would be getting there. So that was one factor, and two, having the sort of right-shaped penis that would kind of remove excess semen in there to get your own in there.
Wow. That did well. That was an eye opener when I saw that clip, and I did research it. And there are other species. Yeah, there are other animals.
But so like chimpanzees equally have. Sorry, could I interrupt you? You talk. So you talk.
There are other animals that have shaped penises that are designed to just scrape out previous participants' semen, and it was fascinating. But yeah, I just wanted to get your view on that, because that just
or even lock in. They've got spiral penises that kind of lock into the other partner so they can't get away. I mean, obviously that's gross, but equally it's also evolution. So that I think fascinating, and the length of the penis. Everyone's obsessed with the idea that a penis should be massive, but actually the average, they did a very big study in the UK, and the average size penis was 5.2 inches. 5.1 inches in length, and that's from the base of the shaft as it touches the pubic bone and the distance to the tip. And obviously, if you've got a curve in it, you've got to measure along the curve using some Taylor's tape. But actually, and there was not a huge amount of variation. So very few people have a very big penis, and very few people have a very small penis. Most people have a kind of 4 to 7 inch penis, if that makes sense. And then most of them are very much in the center, and that makes sense because the average length of the vulva when it's unaroused is 8 centimeters, which is 3.5 inches. So actually, if you had a 10-inch penis trying to go into a 3 to 5 inch space, that's going to be potentially very uncomfortable for the other person, unless they're very highly aroused. So I mean, there are patients that come to us that do have sexual problems because of anatomical mismatch, where basically it's too big to fit.
Mm.
And that can cause real, issues. And it's not the positive thing that people imagine. I think there was that program on British TV about, my massive penis or whatever it's called,
Yeah,
my
I saw
massive
it.
cock or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was actually quite sad hearing the stories of these men that weren't able to have relationships because partly they were fetishized. They were like, oh
Yeah.
yes, great, he's got this big one, that's really important. But actually, people didn't want to then have sex with them. They just kind of wanted to look at it or hold it, but not really sexually engage with it, which left, understandably, these men very frustrated.
It's this thing that's worshipped, isn't it? As you said, it's this narrative that comes from. I mean, obviously, I don't know if that's totally from the porn industry or movie industry, but it's this idea that the bigger the better. But in reality, it's just not. It's just not great for either person if they can't have great sex or
No,
procreate. So crazy.
absolutely. And I think that's if we think about our parents' age, like when I was young, how I mean, if I'm thinking about school, the only I would potentially see my dad when he got out of the shower once on holiday, and I might have seen the kids in the changing room, but that
Mm,
was it. I wasn't seeing any other
yeah, yeah.
penises anywhere. So my range of reference is actually very narrow. Whereas these days, it's like a all you can eat buffet, or maybe not all you can eat. Let's just say buffet of penises everywhere. All you can eat is probably the wrong term.
Yeah, yeah.
But like there's like a massive number of images that you then compare yourself to. I think it's
Mm,
human nature to compare yourself and think, am I less? Am I more? And obviously there's all this comment like big dick energy and big vulva energy and whatever you want to state, as if your personality is defined by your penis length, or the sex quality that you're having is defined by that, and it's frustrating for some people.
yeah. Can you go into because obviously this sort of narrative can create anxiety, as we've briefly mentioned. How does anxiety impact libido?
So um, we're generally quite visual creatures. So if information is coming in through the eyes of something we find attractive, it goes to the part of the brain which activates the erections. We'll just start with men, if that's right. It'll activate the sort of erection centers, and that will send information down the spinal cord. And that actually, so to be fair, this is actually equivalent in women, so we'll do it for both. Information goes into the brain, goes to the back of the brain, stimulates information to go down your spinal cord to your genitals, where it then encourages blood vessels to open up, and you either get vulval engorgement and clitoral increase, or you get an erection. Now, if, however, and to make that happen, that really requires you to relax what's called the sympathetic system. So you've got kind of two systems running in your body: your fight or flight system, which is the sympathetic, and your parasympathetic, which is kind of more chilled out, relaxed system. So at the moment, you and I are activating our sympathetic system because it's not polite to get an erection in public. It's not polite to get an erection in a podcast. We're just not sexually stimulated. So our sympathetic system is running on high.
Yep.
Now, if, however, you're anxious, the sympathetic system ramps up. So you've got loads of that high level nervous energy cutting out that information going down your spinal cord. It's actively limiting your ability to get an erection. So it's a vicious cycle. So if you're already excited to see someone, part of that excitement is actually the sympathetic,
Mm.
and it's keeping you aroused. And so there's a balance between being aroused enough to get, to want to have sex with someone, but then being relaxed enough to not have that information to your genitals overwhelmed. And I think that's what's difficult. Some people have sexual problems on first meeting their partner, and that can then cause issues ongoing in terms of, like, will I get an erection? Will I be able to keep it? Might I lose it? So yeah, it's that really important thing about being able to relax the sympathetic system, let the parasympathetic take over. That will then allow the information to go to your genitals. Blood flow will then go to your penis or your vulva, and then you'll get the genital arousal that wants to hopefully match your mental arousal. And it's the same thing. So with anxiety, performance anxiety, any form of anxiety, you worrying about your mum's illness, you worrying about school, your college or whatever you're worried about, that will again cut through the information going to your genitals, and it will often mean that sex either isn't as pleasurable or doesn't feel as aroused as it would be, or in some cases entirely erectile failure. I think there is this big thing about you should go to work all day and work really hard. You should have got up early. You should have gone to the gym. You should have come back from work. You should have put your kids to bed maybe. You should have then had a couple of drinks and had an evening with your partner, and then you want to try and have sex. And I'm like, really? So when in that really high stress, high anxiety, high sympathetic tone day, are you going to get the moment to actually relax to then have sex? So I think people's expectations about having it all are unrealistic. Yes, you can, but you may have to take moments and recognize we're not going to be able to have sex tonight. Or we're going to have to make time to have sex, particularly if you have a family or a busy life. You may need to go, right, we've got date night. We'll have enough time to spend with each other. We'll re-arouse ourselves. Because the other thing is people forget to flirt when they've been in a long-term relationship.
True.
All of
Yeah,
that kind of
yeah.
sexy stuff that you're
Yeah.
sending as a text, or even the nice comments, or even
Mm.
back in the day when I'm old enough, the nice letters. I mean, God, I make myself sound like I'm 104. But all of that stuff that kind of warms you up in the early days kind of stops. And in the early days, we're like a microwave; you just switch us on. But as it gets older and older, it turn into a bit more of an Aga. And for those of you, an Aga is like an oil-fired oven. It takes hours and hours and hours to warm up. And that's
Yeah, yeah.
what kind of we still should be doing. We should be telling our partners how great they are, how attractive they are, how much we're looking forward to seeing them. And it doesn't need to be about sex. You don't need to be sending them a picture of your dick at work. I'm not suggesting that necessarily, but particularly at work. But equally at the same time, just sending positive inferences about how pleased you are with them and about how much you want to see them and then have sex with them, etc. That gets you really responsive and allows you to get into a space where you're kind of excited but not too excited, which allows you to have sex more easily.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I think that's really powerful, and if anyone takes anything from our conversation today, I think it's that wooing and flirting and romancing your partner because make them feel special and also so that you can feel special. It's such a two-way street. Uh, Going into the,
Yeah, and
just,
there's loads of evidence. So I'm sure you know, but there's a
yeah.
study that was done that showed that if you do anything with your partner that is new, so it doesn't have to be anything sexual. It could be for I don't know, both of you go and see a lovely view, or both of you go and I don't know play table hockey or something like that, and you see each other in a slightly different or new light. You re-trigger that dopamine rush that
Ah,
then gives you more sexual
yeah, yeah, yeah.
interest. So newness is really important to us. So if you see a horror film or you see a lovely view or whatever, that triggers newness, which makes us feel a sense of pleasure that we've got there. And then there'll be opiates at the end of that, which give you the pleasure. So there's dopamine firing up the go-getting bit of it, the searching bit of it, and then the gift you get at the end for having done it is your opiates. And oxytocin, which then
Yeah,
bonds
yeah.
you together. So that's all like if you can keep those fired up over time, that's so important for maintaining a long-term relationship and then maintaining sexual performance. Because actually, it can become more difficult to maintain an erection in a long-term relationship again because you may not find that partner. Well, that partner may look different. I mean, I am 2 stone heavier than when I met my partner. I'm now on a health kick. However, I look different to how I did when I met him a long time ago. So
Mm.
the issue is you have to do a bit of maintenance because the person that I and he met is not the person that we are now. But with that ongoing connection, if you can maintain that, you can sustain a really good relationship.
Again, that's really powerful. Thank you for that because I do think this is something that people often forget and they just get caught up in this wheel of life, this rat race. And not only do they forget to invest in themselves and to look after themselves, but that also has an impact on their relationship with their partner. And again, I'm just going to go into the expectations around sex, and I think that also leans into this expectation to just walk into the bedroom and just rip each other's clothes off and to be able to just not warm up with the oven but just pounce on each other and have this incredible sexual experience. That's a lot of pressure, isn't it? That's something that is completely unrealistic, and yet it's something that these expectations keep coming up. What sort of expectations do you see coming into your clinic that you think, whoa, that's dangerous, or that's not gonna work out?
I mean, the most interesting story I think I've had a story about a patient who had premature ejaculation and had found themselves an unattractive partner to practice on.
Okay.
And I was so because they said, well, I'll last longer because they're not as good looking. And I found that fascinating because I'd been
Mm.
seeing this person over a period of time. And I was taken aback by that. And I thought, so you're purely going to be using them sexually so that you can extend the length of time you can have sex?
Wow.
And they were like, yes. And I said, well, do you want to just take a minute and think about the moral implications of that and the ethical implications of that? How would you feel
Mm.
if that's what this relationship was based on? Um, and that person obviously considered it. I mean, obviously, and I think that sort of thing I find quite problematic. That other people are commodities.
Mm.
And some people do have a view like that. Obviously, that changes, and one hopes that people understand over time that that's not the way they should behave. I mean, hopefully they understand that from the beginning. But I think one forgives young people often for their understanding of relationships, etc. But
Yeah.
lots of those beliefs are maintained throughout life, and I think it is about challenging them when you hear them. But we get lots of issues with how long should I last? I'm not good enough in bed, often related to penis size or vulval appearance. The labia look wrong, and so wanting to have bits removed to look like the perfect vulva that they see on porn, or
Wow.
the type of sex that they're having is actually damaging to them.
Mm.
They saw this in a film that they watched, and they thought they tried out with their partner, and actually they got hurt doing it. Because they weren't aroused and because they were worried about it. And obviously, if you're worried, for example, your pelvic floor clamps up. I mean, your pelvic floor is a muscle sort of
Mm.
sling, and the vagina is kind of like a space with potential space within that. And if, for example, your pelvic floor closes up, it's going to be incredibly painful to try and get a penis within there or whatever you want to put in there. And if women are scared, or if you've got a vagina and you're scared, and you've not got the information going down your spinal cord, you won't lubricate necessarily.
Mm.
Now, some people do auto lubricate, which is a very protective feature, an evolutionary protective feature, because I imagine cavemen weren't necessarily waiting until their partner was necessarily fully excited or lubricated. However, it's also something that we should be really aware of. There is a lot of reporting that people are not necessarily very aware of their arousal. They think they're aroused up here, but their
Mm.
genitals aren't.
Wow.
And
Okay.
I think this disconnect is a real problem because we're not necessarily understanding what particularly turns us on as individuals. I think there's a sort of homogenization of what people should be attracted to. It should always be this body type with that face, with that hair, rather than going, actually, I don't really find that person attractive. I prefer someone, I prefer someone, for example, who's curvy. I prefer someone who's got a hairier chest. I prefer, whatever it is that actually gets you going. And I think learning what actually your responses are. What does make you excited? What does turn you on? Question it. With your partner, it does nibbling an earlobe work for you? Does licking the back of a neck or touching the back of a knee or an inner thigh? Why are we so focused on like nipples and genitals and orifices? Because there's something which I'm sure you talk about called sensate focus,
Mm.
where it's kind of like a body game you play to map the erogenous zones, the sexually interesting parts of you that aren't your genitals. So what you can do is with your partner, you spend 10 minutes on each person's body. It has to be a decent amount of time so you get over the embarrassment of the other person looking at you. And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
spending all of that time just looking at your body, being admired, which can feel really threatening and really embarrassing, but actually let it happen, let that fear go. Once you've got through that, can that be a few minutes? Then if they observe your body and then start to touch you, think about what works for you, because it may be completely different to what you've been doing. And those lessons we learn in early life, we often keep replicating. Oh, yeah, this is what I deserve. It should always be painful. It should never be enjoyable. These are not helpful lessons. I'm meant to enjoy penetrative sex. Why? Yes, you're told as a gay man that either you should be a top or a bottom, or you can be
Yeah.
reversed. You may be, if you're heterosexual, as a woman, you may be told that you should always be on the receiving end of penetration. But actually, in women, all the fun's in the front. Well, lots of the fun is in the front. The vulva's all the front. So it's entirely possible to have a very healthy, fabulous sex life without ever penetrating. And if that's something that appeals to you, have a talk to your partner. You know, one would hope that communication and avenues of communication have got better, but I don't think they necessarily have. I think the sexual expectations around us are so strong
Mm.
that it means it's difficult to say, I don't know if I like the way we kiss,
Yeah.
or
Yeah. Yeah.
actually, I might enjoy it in a different way if we tried that. And obviously, I wouldn't say it like that. I'd say, I really love it when you do X, trying to promote the positive response that you want, right?
Yeah.
But it can feel really challenging to something like that. Or if you want to be touched in a way or have a type of sex that you feel that the other person might be threatened by, is really challenging. If you want to change the roles up, if you've always been, for example, a receptive partner and you want to be the active partner, but you've never broached that, hopefully you have the communication, which is the biggest thing. And I'm sure this is such a key thing for you and your clients, is the ability to communicate with your partner, which hopefully evolves over time, but sometimes gets stuck.
Yeah.
We think we're the people that we are, and actually, as you get older, have more fun. There is a freedom in the menopause in some ways. Lots of women find that they're more sexually vibrant because they don't have to worry about getting pregnant.
Okay. Um,
There is less restrictions. There is a specific, yeah, there's a real cultural and social thing
mm,
about that. I mean, obviously, for other people, because of the menopause and the hormone changes, they lubricate less well, and sex can be more uncomfortable. But often with HRT, that can be completely resolved. And I appreciate menopause is not a single thing. It's such a variety across people. It's such a massive spectrum of how people respond when they're menopausal. But some people find it very difficult to have sex, and their skin mapping changes. So the lack of estrogen, the low estrogen levels, means that sensation can be different. So I used to, you might be used to like having your neck touched, but all of a sudden you hate it. So
yeah.
actually, that you have to tell your partner that, because otherwise you're now having sex you don't like. Which isn't going to work for you. So being able to communicate the fact that things have changed, and then having a partner that will explore the new geography, the new landscape of your body, is really important. And I don't even know, I mean, for you, what are you seeing more of now with your clients?
Um, mostly it was I got a lot of young guys. It was mostly coming to me around their sexual confidence. Some of them have never had sex, and they want to have sex. Um, but the way that they were approaching it was very terrifying for them. Somehow they were going to somehow do that in a nightclub, which I know it sounds quite traditional. You go to a nightclub, you get dancing with someone, and then you pull or whatever. But there seems to be a different sort of attitude towards that now, and these guys are lacking in the ability to approach someone and to have a conversation. You talked about communication just then, and I do think there's a real communication issue happening as a whole. So that's been a big thing. And so a question that came up around communication earlier from my community was, what do you do if your partner won't wear condoms, which is a necessity, and then that's a communication issue. Really, it's
I
what
mean,
is it
it's
about?
abuse, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it's what is it that's happening where the other person is saying no to something that you feel is vital. There needs to be a conversation around that. What would you advise them? Because it was a question that they wanted me to ask you. So
I mean, my sort of immediate first thought
mm,
is my safeguarding hat goes on,
yeah,
in terms of thinking, are you being forced to do a sex act that you don't want to do or in a way that you don't want to? Because if they're refusing to wear a condom, you're having sex in a way that you don't want to have sex.
yeah,
So to me, that would feel abusive, potentially rape.
yeah,
So for me, it's actually extremely worrisome. It's crossing a boundary that you would like to have there. There is a lack of consent. To, I mean, I know we shouldn't necessarily talk in like green flags and red flags, but to
yeah, yeah,
me, that's a red flag. That is a problem for me. If your partner is so dismissive of your view that you should be using a condom, that you will have sex without one, that to me is an absolute problem.
yeah,
And now,
yeah,
but I appreciate that's not necessarily, there's so many reasons, and relationships are so complicated, and there's so many
yeah,
things that bind us together. And it may be that you want to be with them, you love them, and this is that one thing. And I appreciate, for me, it feels like quite a big thing, but I appreciate for you, it might be lesser, because there's so many different reasons, aren't they, that you value in terms of why you're having a relationship with them. Is it because you emotionally love them? Is it because they provide safety? Is it security? Is it the sex is great? Are you dignitized because they've got a brilliant penis, or they look beautiful? What is,
yeah,
have they got money? What is the reason? What are your reasons for being with them? And if actually not wearing a condom doesn't matter to you that much, then it may be a reason that you kind of go, actually, I will accept that because of everything else. But if it is a problem for you, then it's a conversation that needs to be had. And those conversations, I think, are much better done not when you're having sex. They need to be, from my point of view, in like a neutral environment as possible, when both people are rested and relaxed and people have not been drinking or under the influence of anything.
Yeah,
And
I
if you are
absolutely,
then able to just think,
I
so
agree with you. I think,
you do this more
sorry.
than I do, I'm sure. But I think having a conversation where you ask permission for that conversation, going, look, I want to talk to you about something, is now a good time.
Mm.
And I think you have to be upfront about how it makes you feel.
Yep, I
And,
absolutely
and,
agree
and
with
if
that.
you work with I feel comments, I think that can come across as less challenging. Not that you shouldn't be challenging, don't get me wrong, I'm very
Yeah,
pro this should be definitely challenged. But I think the way you challenge it is important because it depends on what outcome you want. If you want to fight, go in full with, you're a fucking bastard that doesn't wear condoms. All right. You want to
yeah,
go
yeah.
big, but actually that's going to bring you to a fight level immediately. So if that's not what you want, then actually you'll phrase it a different way. I mean, what do you encourage, Paul?
Again, I do encourage the type of language which doesn't put the other person in defensive mode. So yeah, exactly with the, this is how it's impacting me without the directing it at you, so that they're talking about their feelings and how it makes them feel, and get the other person to understand where they're coming from. If they're going with the "you're making me feel," "you're doing this to me," etc., you're gonna get a fight on your hands, and it's really important to get across exactly what it is that you want to happen as well. And to make sure that your point is heard, even if you write it down first of all. But it is having these conversations without alcohol, without not when you're about to have sex or during sex or after sex, but in a place where you feel safe, so that you can just get an idea of what it is, where the other person's coming from, understand where they're coming from on it, and put your point across.
I mean, I heard a lovely thing about saying like, the story I have in my head is,
Yeah,
and then you start talking, because each of us have a view, and then there's the truth that hopefully lies somewhere in
yeah, yeah,
between that. And the perspective that someone else has might be entirely. I think most of the time people are not bad people. I think most of the time they're just not thinking, or I think most of the time that they're not actively trying to cause you harm or actively ignoring your feelings. I think they probably just don't understand what it means to you. There will be cases, and I'm sure that there are and that we have had problems with
mm,
active abusive situations
yeah,
where people are actively dismissive and actually gain some sort of sexual power from this, and
yeah,
not wearing condoms and getting people repeatedly pregnant, whether or not they keep the baby, is a significant form of abuse for some people. It's a form of control.
mm,
So I'm not saying this is easy and this is something you should stay in every situation. What I'm saying is, if this is the right conversation for you to have, going, look, I'd like us to wear condoms, and that's something that you feel you can negotiate in this relationship, that's really helpful to do so. If you find it's actually abusive, you probably need to be contacting some form of domestic violence
yeah,
or abuse line to support you through this.
yeah. And I think that the advice that we've just been given is, I think that covers any type of sexual act which is without a consent, or there's an issue around, or your wishes are not being respected. I think it's reaching out if you need help with the right people, if you feel there's an abuse involved, but also learning to communicate. And it's that learning to communicate which seems to be sadly missing in a world where we've never been so connected, but yet we can't seem at points to be able to communicate our own needs. And I think a lot of that does come down to, we don't often know what our needs are. I mean, if I ask a new client, what do you really, really want? I can see their eyes, moving left to right. I don't know what type of question is this, and most people don't know what they really want. And I think it's a good time to find out, no matter what age you are, really. Explore what it is, who you are, what
Yeah,
it
I
is
think
that you really want for this life. Yeah.
that's so important. I mean, I'm sat here wearing a pearl choker, right? And I was thinking
I love
before I
that.
put this on, and I was genuinely thinking before I put this on, going, do I want to appear on a podcast wearing a pearl choker? And then I thought, well, does it give me pleasure? Do I enjoy it? Do I like the color of it? Do I like the?
Yeah.
I do actually. So what I'm trying to do is hide myself by trying to appear how I expect people might want their doctor to look like. And I
Yeah.
don't wear this in work, but like I thought that I need to stop being so performative and actually go with, I'm in a safe space. I'm talking to a mate.
Mm.
I'm having a conversation. Why wouldn't I dress the way I want to dress? And equally, I would extend that to conversations I need to have with my partner, my friends, the way I want my friends to treat me. Because obviously, obviously there's sexual relationships, but equally there are friendship relationships which I value as almost as deeply. Not quite as, sorry, Matt. Almost as deeply as I do my sexual relationship. So I want those to be of high value, and that requires me to know what I need to get out of that relationship, me to understand from you what I'm giving or not giving,
Yeah.
as the case may be. And sometimes it may be I'm just talking a bit too much about myself, or the energy's the other way, and actually you've had a really difficult time with fertility, or you've had a really difficult time with your work or whatever, and it's fine because actually it ebbs and flows, doesn't it? But being able to have those conversations, going, do you mind if we just talked a little bit less about work? In a way that's friendly and supportive, but that equally extends to everything. I don't understand with the apps out there, with Tinder, with Grindr, and with all of these things. I recognize the benefit of them because you can access a whole range of people that you wouldn't necessarily meet in real
Mm.
life. But the problem with that is if you haven't met them in real life, and then you have to try and engage with people in a nightclub, in a bar, or wherever, or in college, or wherever you meet someone, how do you talk to them for the first time? How do you chat someone up? How do you engage in friendship conversation? Let's forget sexual conversation. How do you have conversations with your grandparents who aren't going to be around for much longer? How do you have these valuable conversations if you don't necessarily have the tools? Because all of it is via an app, or it's
Yeah.
typed, or it's a series of emojis. And that's why I feel that social media is very much a double-edged sword. I think it's great that it's able to
Mm.
access such a massive community, and you can learn so much in such a short space of time. I think that's wonderful. But what I do think it's missing is that human contact, face to face, in someone else's presence. That I think is so valuable as a human being. And we know that loneliness, if you think yourself as lonely, it's as bad to your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
It is. Yeah.
It's got
Yeah.
higher risks of dementia, higher risks of heart attacks, poorer immune function, all of high risk of cancer, all of these things because we've evolved to need it, and we are losing the tools to communicate, which allows us to have that. And we're also isolating ourselves because we're online. So I think mixing the online with the personal and in
Mm.
person, I think is really where I'd encourage people. See your friends face to face. Don't just type to them through Discord or wherever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Be with them, engage.
I think that's such great advice. And it's something that I'm seeing quite a lot. There are lots of children living in captivity, is how I call it. They're not really allowed to go out and play. And when I was a kid, we built our social skills up through, social dynamics of the children that were in our streets and things like that, whether it was negative or positive. That's how we learned to communicate. And besides, I know that kids do that at school.
I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes you're right. It was a bit
Sorry,
feral.
you're saying? Yeah.
So it's
Sorry.
sorry.
So you can.
Well, sometimes obviously our childhoods were a bit feral, weren't they?
Yeah.
Because you were kind of like left at 9 a.m. and you'd come back at some unspecified time, having been wandering
Yeah.
God
Yeah.
knows where. And so I think there is a balance to be struck between that lovely
Yeah.
looseness that actually allowed you to feel confident in each other's company, and actually then meant that because you were socialized, you could then socialize with people that you might want to have
Yeah.
romantic or sexual relationships with, because you kind of knew the rules of engagement, or you kind of learned some really crappy rules
True.
from your friends, and then you tried them out and they realized your
Yeah.
friends were idiots, and didn't know what they were talking about. But equally, that was kind of a really good
Mm.
experiential way of learning that. So yeah, I mean, I love the fact that you can kind of like wiki how to break up with someone, or
Yeah.
how to
Yeah.
do this and how to do that. I don't think there's anything like the real life experience of kind of being turned down,
Yeah.
and and how that actually feels, but also getting back off that. You fall off that horse. It's devastating. It's embarrassing. It's shameful. It's frustrating. It's all of these things. But then you kind of go, okay, I can either not ask someone else out for another 5 years, which is what I did, because it was
Oh,
so
okay.
humiliating to me, or I can kind of go, do you know what? I would like to try this again, and I know I might get hurt, but all I'm doing is asking a question.
Mm.
If someone says no, that's okay. I'm allowed to ask, and they're allowed to
Yeah.
say no.
And I think this is a good place for us to, unfortunately, end our conversation because I know you're busy. You're going off to look for a dog. I think is this your new experience for you and Matt?
We're
Is this your new
we're
thing?
going to visit a puppy. Well, this is a new thing. This is something that Matthew wants very much, and this is something that I am not sure I want. So we are having lots of
Yeah.
conversations, including, which is actually really good for our communication, including me going, so when this dog inevitably chews one of my lovely pair of shoes, and I shout
Yeah.
at you, how are you going to respond? And his answer was, I will recognize that it's entirely my fault. I wanted the dog, and we shall have conversation about reparations, which is exactly
Okay,
what I
so
needed to
you,
hear.
you got it. Cool. So, I hope it goes well for you. I'll have to pop round and, well, if you get the dog, obviously, I'll pop round and see the little one and things like that. Thank you so much for this amazing conversation. So much gold here for people, and hopefully, it get people to really rethink their expectations around sex and their relationships and their communication. Please sort out your communication, people. That's what I'd say, because it's so important. If people want to find more about you, Dr. Anand Patel, or TV's Dr. Anand Patel, as we call you. Where, can, where can they find you? Yeah,
Well, just basically
yeah,
on Instagram, it's Dr.
lovely.
ANA.ND.
I will put that.
So at Dr.
Perfect. I will
ANA.ND.
put your details in the show notes. And just let people know if you loved this conversation, we are having another one next month all around health and, mental health and things in general, physical health. So look out for that because it will be, I know, as entertaining as this one. I just want to say thank you so much for coming on to the show, Anand. It's been amazing to have you here finally. And I hope it goes well with your doggy this afternoon.
Thank you so much for such a lovely experience, Paul. It's been really lovely talking to you. So thank you so much for your time.
I'm going to stop it there because I'm going to